Hello and welcome to today's video on Pythagorean Theorem. This is going to cover topics in the standard 3.1 in geometry and then also all those questions under the study island topic Pythagorean Theorem. So I'm glad that you're here today, and this is actually something that you will probably use in real life. My husband and I, we built our own apartment way back when, and he actually used Pythagorean Theorem to make sure that the corners were actually square, because when you're building a room, you need the corners to be square or your structure is not completely safe. So after you watch this video, you can work on the questions in the study island topic, Pythagorean Theorem. And as always, just remember our study tips. Make sure you're taking notes. If I go too fast, go ahead and pause the video so you can get caught back up. And then you can pause at the beginning of a couple of questions, see how well you do with the Pythagorean Theorem, and then come back and watch and check your work. So I'm glad that you're here, and let's go ahead and take some notes. So first, Pythagorean Theorem is this formula, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So A and B are the legs of the right triangle. And a leg of the right triangle, those are our shorter sides. And they're also the ones that make the right triangle. So this right triangle symbol here, if you add arrows to it, actually points to the two legs. And every right triangle has two legs, just like every person has two legs. So, and then our hypotenuse is our longest side. And it's also the side that's directly across from the right angle. And that's what the C stands for. That's C squared. So if you take the length of the legs, square them and add them, that equals the length of the hypotenuse squared. So in this first example, they tell us that side Q is 53 centimeters. And P is 28 centimeters in the right triangle above. What is the length of R? So it's a right triangle. I can only use Pythagorean Theorem with a right triangle, but it is a right triangle, so I can go ahead and use a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And so A and B are my legs. And my legs here that form the right triangle are P and R. And I know one of them is 28 and the other one's what I'm looking for. Which one is A and which one is B doesn't matter, as long as you mark them both as legs. So I'm just going to put 28 squared plus B squared. You could put it A squared plus 28 squared. Either way works. However, this 53 is the hypotenuse. It's across from the right angle. It always has to be C. So I'm going to go ahead and write 53 squared here. And then I'm just going to go ahead and solve. My first step is to actually square those numbers. So 28 squared is 784 plus b squared equals 53 squared, which is 2,809. And then I'm going to go ahead and subtract 784 from both sides. And they cancel. And b squared equals, and then when I subtract those two numbers, I'm left with 2,025. That b is still squared there, though it's not completely by itself. So my last step is to take the square root of both sides, because the square root and the square are opposite operations. So I'm just left with b. And then the square root of 2,025 is 45, which is my answer, A. Okay, this next problem says y is 8 centimeters and z is 15 centimeters. So I'm going to go ahead and label those sides 8 and 15, and it wants to know what is the length of x. So this is a right triangle, and I know two of the lengths, so that's a big red flag. Then I'm going to go ahead and use Pythagorean Theorem. So a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Okay, So my legs here are Y and Z because they form the right angle. They're my two shorter sides. So that means these are going to be my A and B numbers, 8 and 15. So I'm going to go ahead and substitute into that. So I'm going to have 8 squared plus 15 squared, and I'm looking for my hypotenuse, so I'm looking for C, so I'm going to have that equal to C squared. Then I'm going to go ahead and square those numbers. 8 squared is 64, and 15 squared is 225. Then I go ahead and add them, and that sum is 289 equals C squared. And then my last step when I'm finding the Pythagorean theorem is to take the square root of both sides. That cancels out the square, and I'm just left with a plain old C, and the square root of 289 is 17. So that means my length here is 17. Now, here's just a little trip. Some people find this kind of helpful, and other people don't. So if it doesn't help you, you don't have to know this or use it. But if it helps you, then definitely use it. We have these things called Pythagorean triples. And the definition is any three whole numbers that satisfy the equation a squared plus b squared equals c squared form a Pythagorean triple. So here, because 8, 15, and 17 aren't decimals or fractions, they're considered a Pythagorean triple. So if I had realized 8 and 15 are my legs, oh, I know the Pythagorean triple 8, 15, 17, then I wouldn't have to do any math. I would just instantly know, oh, the hypotenuse is 17. So in all of these, the two smaller numbers are your legs, and the hypotenuse is your bigger number because the hypotenuse is always your longer side. And I wouldn't necessarily memorize all 16 of these. This first row here is the most common ones. And especially the first one there, 3, 4, 5. That's, if you're not going to memorize any of them but one, I would pick 3, 4, 5. And then any multiples of that work also, or any multiples of any of them. So if I take 3 times 2, that gives me 6. 4 times 2 is 8, and 5 times 2 is 10. So 6, 8, 10 is another Pythagorean triple. And that one I see a lot used also. This problem reads, firefighters have a 26-foot extension ladder. In order to reach a 24 feet up a building, how far away from the building should the foot of the ladder be placed? Well, I'm going to go ahead and draw a picture. So I have my building, and I have my ladder. Okay, I know that this ladder is 26 feet. Okay, I know they want to go 24 feet up on the building, but I don't know how far from the building that means I have to put my ladder. So this is what I'm looking for. Now, the ground and the building you can assume make a right angle. So this gives me the right triangle. So it's a right triangle, and I know 2 of the sides, and I'm missing one of them. So that's a red light that I want to use Pythagorean triple, or Pythagorean theorem. So that's a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And here, I know one of my legs is 24, but the other one I don't know, so I'm going to have 24 squared plus b squared equals, and then my hypotenuse is 26. So my first step is to actually square those numbers. 24 squared is 576, and 26 squared is 676. So then I subtract 576 from both sides. And that leaves me with b squared equals 100. And then you take the square root of both sides. And so the square root and the square cancel, and I'm left with b equals, and the square root of 100 is 10. So that means I need to put the ladder 10 feet away from the base of the building, so my answer is D. This problem says 2 ships leave port at the same time. Ship X is heading due north and ship Y is heading due east. 6 hours later, they are 300 miles apart. If ship X has traveled 240 miles from the port, how many miles will ship Y travel? So first thing is we need to remember that our compass points are north, west, east, and south. And so we'll say that this is our port. And we have ship X going due north. So that's going up the screen. We're going to label that X. And then ship Y also leaves that same port, but it goes east. So that's going to be to the right of our screen. So we'll go ahead and label that Y. And so 6 hours later, they're 300 miles apart. So that means this right here is 300 miles. It tells us that ship X goes 240 miles from the port. So that means this side of the triangle is 240. And it wants to know how many miles will Y travel? Well, east and north make a right angle. And so that gives me a right triangle where I know two of the sides, but I don't know the third side. So that means I'm going to use Pythagorean Theorem. So 240 and the Y, those are my legs, and 300 is my hypotenuse. So I'm going to have 240 squared plus B squared equals 300 squared. So my first step is to square the actual numbers. 240 squared is 57,600. And 300 squared is 90,000. So then I subtract 57,600 from both sides. These cancel out, and I'm just left with B squared on the left equals, and when I do that subtraction, I get 32,400. And then my last step is to take the square root of both sides. That cancels the square out because they're opposite operations, and I'm just left with B equals. And the square root of that number is 180. So that means my answer is going to be C, 180 miles. The other way we can use Pythagorean Theorem is to label a triangle either acute, right, or obtuse. And the way that we do that is we are going to we're going to calculate C squared and then the A squared plus B squared. So we're going to calculate both sides of the equation, and then with C squared first, if C squared is less than the sum, then that's an acute triangle. If both sides are equal, that means it's a right triangle. And if C squared is greater than this sum, then it's an obtuse triangle. So this allows us, it's called the converse of Pythagorean theorem, and it allows us to classify triangles by their angles. So this example here, we're going to be using the converse. And it says, which of the following measurements could be the side length of an obtuse triangle? So we're just going to have to calculate each one of these and see if C squared is greater than the sum. So remember, C squared is our hypotenuse, and it's always our largest number. So here, C squared is going to be 7 in A. So I have 7 squared for my C squared, and then I'll have 4 squared plus 6 squared for my other side, for my A and my B. So 7 squared is 49. And then 4 squared is 16 plus 6 squared is 36. And when I do that sum, 16 plus 36 is 52. 49 can't be simplified anymore. So here 52 is bigger. So C squared is less than A squared plus B squared. This is a less than symbol, so A is acute, not obtuse. So then I try out B. My largest number there is 10, so 10 squared is going to be my C squared. And then I have my two legs, which are 6 and 8, so I'm going to write 6 squared plus 8 squared. 10 squared is 100, 6 squared is 36, and 8 squared is 64. 36 plus 64 is 100. 100 equals 100. So it's not going to be B. B is going to be right because they're the same on both sides. So it can't be obtuse. So then we try out C. C, my largest number there is 7. And then my two legs are both 5. 7 squared is 49. 5 squared is 25. Plus another 5 squared is 25. And that makes this 50. So 49 is less than 50. This is another acute triangle, so it can't be C. So let's go ahead and look at D. D, my largest number is 7, so I write 7 squared first, and then I have 4 squared plus 5 squared for my legs, and then I go ahead and figure those out. 7 squared is 49, 4 squared is 16, and 5 squared is 25. And then I go ahead and do 16 plus 25, I add the sum. That's 41. I have 49 on the left side. 49 is greater than 41. I finally got my greater than symbol, so my answer here is D. Okay, this problem here is very similar, only this time we're looking to see which one of these side lanes could create an acute angle. So an acute angle, that's when C squared is less than A squared plus B squared. So first I'm going to try out my letter A. And the square root of 13, that's my largest number there. Because we have square root of 9 is 3. And the square root of 16 is 4. And since 13 is between 9 and 16, that means that square root is between 3 and 4. You could also just type square root of 13 into the calculator, get the decimal, and then that'll show you if it's the largest number there also. So I'm going to have the square root of 13 being squared on the left, and then my two legs, 2 squared plus 3 squared on the right. The square root of 13 squared, the square root and the square cancel, and I'm just left with 13. And then 2 squared is 4, and 3 squared is 9. 4 plus 9 is 13. That makes both sides equal, so that's going to be a right triangle, not acute, so it can't be A. So now I'm going to look at choice B. Here, the square root of 11 is still the biggest number, so that's going to be my hypotenuse side, so I'm going to square it. And then I want to see how it compares to the other side where I have 2 squared plus 3 squared. The square root and the square cancel, and I'm just left with 11 on the left. And then I have 4 plus 9, which is 13. And 11 is less than 13. So this one, B, it makes an acute triangle, so that's my answer. Thank you for joining us today, and I hope you learned something new.